Hello, and welcome back to History 101, World Civilization to 1100. This is Professor Gaughan at Colorado State University in Pueblo. We are in Unit 3, Government and the Articulation of Political Power, and today we're talking about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire comes into being when the Republic comes to an end, roughly dated to around 30 BCE, and the Roman Empire ends, we're going to pick a date, 479 CE. There are a lot of different ways to look at the end of the Roman Empire, but 479 CE will work for us. Now, one of the amazing things to me about the Romans is that they actually managed to create a geographical empire. That is, they controlled territories belonging to other peoples without actually having an emperor. The Romans created their geographical empire during the Roman Republic. So we saw this slide last time when we looked at the Roman Republic, the expansion of Roman power between 500 and 218 BCE. And then the expansion of power from 500 here to also through the death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. So this territory that you see that was conquered by the Romans on this map is territory that the Romans conquered before they had an empire, when they were still running their government as a republic. So it gets a little bit confusing to talk about territorial empires on the one hand and political empires on the other hand. So the territorial empire gets created during the Republic and, as we will see, expands during the empire. And the political empire starts around 30 BCE. Ironically, it's actually the success of the Romans in the creation of their territorial empire that puts an end to the Roman Republic. And so I want to start today by talking about the demise of the Roman Republic is what we're going to talk about here. And the demise of the Roman Republic, I would argue, is caused by all the pressures created by the territorial empire and the reluctance of the Romans and the inability of the Roman system to adapt to these changes. So let's start by thinking about money. When the Romans expand to control not quite all this territory you see on the map, but much of this territory you see on the map, there's a huge influx of wealth into Rome. Ironically, this huge influx of wealth also includes a huge influx of slaves to Rome. And so what ends up happening is a lot of Romans go out of business. That is, lower class Romans go out of business because the slaves take over their jobs, especially in agriculture on the Italian peninsula. So you start to get an increase in the number of urban poor in the city of Rome who are unemployed. And so you have to kind of figure out what to do with them. So all that wealth kind of changes things. You also get a lot more wealth in the hands of the rulers of Rome, who are also the richest people of Rome, the senators, and even the equestrians. Remember, we talked about on the Roman Republic the nature of social hierarchy. If you have not looked at the Roman Republic video, you might want to do that because this discussion will make a little bit more sense. Okay, so lots of money coming in is causing tension in various ways. The rich are getting far, far richer, and the lower class folks who used to maybe be subsistence farmers, right, have a farm that could feed their family, are now hanging out largely in the city of Rome, causing trouble. So there's an increase in violence, in urban violence in the capital, in Rome itself. here's the other thing. The Romans are obsessed by glory and by honor, and they see their obligation as always doing better, always getting more honor and more glory. And so not only more honor and more glory than that individual Roman has already had, but also more honor and more glory than any of that Roman's relatives have had. So there is a need to always do better. So when Rome was very small, when Rome occupied, this little land along the Tiber River, it was relatively limited how much glory you could get. You might, for example, defeat a local ruler of some other little city or town nearby and get glory by the celebration of that victory. But now what we're talking about, as the Roman territory expands, is bigger and bigger victories, more and more prestige that comes along with those victories, more and more glory that comes along with those victories. But remember also what I said last time about the role of personal relationships, the role of friendship, and in particular, the role of enemyship. Enemyship in Rome meant that you had to attack your enemies. This actually was a functioning tool of the Republic for quite a long time, that somebody would come back home with a little too much glory, and the enemies, the personal enemies of that person at home, would find some way to undermine the power of that successful general, let's say. One of the underlying motives behind this behavior actually worked to the advantage of the Republic, and that was that the Romans really hated monarchy. Right? They wanted very much to prevent a rise of monarchy. And in order to do this, they wanted to make sure that no individual person got power. So they created all the annual magistracies and so on that we talked about with the Republic. But they also had this personal style of mechanism that if anybody did get too powerful, the enemies of that person would be sure to bring them down. This worked, as I said, very well for a long time in Rome, this personal nature of politics. But as the empire gets bigger, the tasks for managing it not only get bigger, but get more complicated. It's hard to run an empire the way you run maybe a smaller system like the Romans had on that personal nature. Okay, so here's your task as a Roman, let's say a Roman magistrate. You are sent out to command troops in, let's say, Asia. Asia's nice because it's really rich and we can steal all their money. By the way, Asia, the province that becomes Asia is the western part of Turkey. Okay, so you're sent out to command in Asia. You make all these settlements in Asia and all these arrangements with the king. You're getting a lot of glory. You come back home and you try to undermine your glory. But undermining your glory also means creating more chaos back in Asia. So it's problematic to function that way when you run an empire and not just a small political organization. But you have to have your glory. You have to have greater prestige, greater power than you had before, than your ancestors before you had. Let me give you an example. This may be, in fact, this is an extreme example. And the example is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, more than any other person perhaps, was obsessed by his glory. And Julius Caesar had an uncle named Marius. And Marius had held the consulship 7 times. The consulship is the highest political position one can hold in Rome. And Marius had held it 7 times, whereas most people who held it, and there were very few percentage-wise of people who held it, most people who held it only once. Marius held it 7 times. Julius Caesar's got to do better than that. How the heck do you do better than 7 consulships in a row when most people hold 1? Not quite in a row, but 7 consulships. Well, Julius Caesar sort of manages it. But in becoming more glorious and more famous than his maternal uncle, he also manages to bring an end to the Roman Republic. In his attempt to gain more glory and to prevent himself from being undermined by his enemies back in Rome, Julius Caesar retains command of his troops in Gaul, that is, in the area we now call France, for perhaps longer than he should. And so he marches those troops across the Po River into Italy, and he helps bring about the end of the Roman Republic. When he writes about the civil wars, he actually has written a few books, one about the Gallic Wars, the campaigns that he practiced in Gaul, and one about the civil wars. And in his book about the civil wars, he actually comes right out in writing and says, my personal enemies back in Rome are trying to undermine my glory, so I had to come and stop them. This is a pretty amazing thing from our point of view to put in a book, but Caesar saw that as a legitimate explanation for his actions, or at least part of the legitimate explanation for his actions. So you can get a sense of why the personal had an impact on how the Republic came to an end. There was just too much opportunity for glory and power in the empire, and ultimately it was taken by those most capable of seizing it. When Julius Caesar takes power, he becomes dictator. Now, the term dictator in Rome was actually an official Roman position. The dictatorship was to last for 6 months in periods of crisis in Rome, where they really needed one person in charge who could do stuff. It hadn't been put into place in a long time until about 40 years before Caesar dies. But Julius Caesar uses it, and just before Julius Caesar is assassinated, he is granted the position of dictator for life. But in 44, on the Ides of March, in this case the 15th of March, Julius Caesar is killed by a conspiracy of senators who are afraid that Julius Caesar wants to be king, and they really don't want a king in Rome. It didn't quite work out the way they had planned. When they killed Julius Caesar, the conspirators, burst out into the forum. They killed him in the Senate House. They burst out into the forum, the civic and economic center of Rome, ready to cheer that Caesar is dead. And instead, everybody panics. These people really thought that if they killed Julius Caesar, everything would return to the Republic. But that turned out not to be true. And so Julius Caesar dies. Shortly after he dies, there are many people struggling for power. And among them, and the ones, one of these 3 will be the most successful, were Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Mark Antony had been second in command in Julius Caesar's dictatorship. Octavian was Julius Caesar's nephew and also his adopted son. Julius Caesar adopted him. And Lepidus was a general in Spain, so had a whole bunch of troops. So these 3 guys got together and create a triumvirate. Triumvirate simply means the board of 3 men. Trium is 3 and vir is man in Latin. So the triumvirate is 3 men. This becomes an official post. They get all the powers of the chief magistrates in Rome. So, and they share them, but they share pretty much like 2-year-olds. So, in other words, they start fighting as soon as they kill off even before they kill off the assassins of Julius Caesar. They start fighting after they kill off. They join forces for a little while after they kill off the assassins of Julius Caesar. They start fighting against each other in earnest. Lepidus was hopelessly outclassed, and he becomes irrelevant in about 40 BCE. And Mark Antony and Octavian wage all kinds of war, both a propaganda war as well as a military war against each other. And Octavian is ultimately successful in both. Mark Antony ends up fleeing the final battle with Octavian back to Cleopatra in Alexandria by Egypt. And then Antony commits suicide in 30, and then Octavian becomes Augustus. Octavian becomes the first emperor in Rome. The documents that we're looking at for class are the documents from or about Roman emperors at different periods of time. So the three Roman emperors that are under consideration here are Augustus, who reigned from 30 BCE to 14 CE, Vespasian, who reigned from 69 to 79 CE, and Aelius Aristides. Aelius Aristides is the author. Antoninus Pius is the emperor. And so Aelius Aristides wrote about the reign of Antoninus Pius around 155 CE. So we're going to look at all three of these and compare them in class. So what things, when you look at these documents, what elements seem to be the same? What elements seem to be different? Why might that be? Take a look at the chronology and the timing of these. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these emperors, especially about Augustus, in just a minute to help you sort of think about those questions. And also think about what Polybius wrote about the Roman Republic. Is that still an influential idea in the Roman Empire? Okay, so in order to understand a little bit about what Augustus is writing in his Deeds of the Divine Augustus, or the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, we want to talk a little bit about Augustus. Remember now, the Romans hate kingship. Julius Caesar was killed for wanting to be a king and for taking the dictatorship for life. Julius Caesar's adopted son and biological great-nephew, Octavian, was very, very clever. You wouldn't necessarily have wanted to live while he was alive, because if you did, you probably would die, but he was just very, very clever, and one of the most brilliant things about him, perhaps, is that he seldom made the same mistake twice. So any mistakes he did make, he corrected. And so we see him trying to position himself to keep power in Rome, but position himself as not being a monarch. So he's wearing a disguise. So look at the way he talks about himself and his activities in the Deeds of the Divine Augustus, and see if you can see elements of that disguise. Let me talk about it a little bit. In 27 BCE, the triumvirate came to an end. Now, of course, in practice, the triumvirate was pretty much over since Antony was dead and Lepidus was retired. But in 27, it officially came to an end. It was the triumvirate was appointed for 5 years, and then another 5 years. So it comes to an end. Augustus, or Octavian at that point, comes before the Senate and says, "Oh, here, let me return everything." And everybody's like, no, because of course not everybody did not want civil war to start again, because it was bloody and horrible for 15 years in Rome. So, and really bloody and horrible even before then, but really bloody and horrible while Octavian was in charge of Italy. So Octavian says, okay, I won't leave you entirely. Let me give you back some provinces. I'll just take charge of the provinces that are the most troublesome, in other words, the provinces that have the army in them. And I'll just take responsibility for the grain supply in Rome. Okay, so Octavian says, and Octavian says, no, I don't want to be dictator. No, I don't want to be named Romulus. Romulus was the name of the first mythical king of Rome. He says, don't give me any of that stuff. I'll just be in charge of a few provinces. I'll just be a consul, like one of the chief magistrates, like you guys, and I'll just take control of the grain supply. So just the military and the food, everything else is yours. You can get a sense of Augustus's skill at propaganda in that maneuver. He also takes the title of Augustus. So he rejects the dictatorship. He rejects the names of any kings. And instead, he becomes Augustus. Augustus means in Latin what August means in English, which is revered, honored. It has that sort of religious overtones to it in terms of respect and authority. And he refers to himself as first among equals. This is absolutely brilliant. Totally meaningless, but absolutely brilliant. First among equals. What the heck does that mean? Okay. Then things actually look pretty bad for him. He was a sickly fellow, and so he nearly died in 23. And so he starts to rearrange the system a little bit later. So in 23 and following, he starts to change how he runs the government. And instead of holding one of the magistracies, he becomes a private citizen. Except that he's granted maius imperium, or imperium maius, more power. So imperium is the power to command armies and to command Roman citizens. And so he does not hold any posts that give him power. Like the consulship is a post where you have imperium. Okay, he doesn't hold the post, he just has the power. He also takes tribunicia potestas, tribunician power. So again, he's not a tribune. Tribunes of the plebs were officials in the Roman Republic who were thought to be spokespeople of the people, right? The person who could speak for the people. And also they had veto power over everybody else in government. And they were not supposed to be touched. It was sacrilege to kind of touch them or injure them in any way. So Augustus gives up holding any official posts, but he takes more power than anybody else who does hold official posts, and he takes tribunician power, which means he can veto anybody, and nobody gets to touch him. So Augustus is not an emperor. There's no such word as emperor in Rome yet. Our word emperor comes from imperator, which is a Roman word. But at the moment, it still just means general. It doesn't mean emperor. So Augustus has all of this power, but he has no position. That's not quite enough. Augustus also needs a little more. He needs to take on the priesthood, including the position of Pontifex Maximus. Now, the priesthoods generally are held by senators in Rome. We tend to think of religion and state as separate. Not the case in Rome. So all of the really important priesthoods, nearly all of them, are held by Roman senators. So again, the richest, the most elite. So Augustus holds the chief priesthood among all, and all the other priesthoods as well. So you'll see him talking about religion in the Deeds of the Divine Augustus too. And then he also holds the censorship. The censor has the same kind of meaning also in English, or double meaning as it does in English. The censor counts people, right? Who people are and where they fit by category. For the Romans, this was largely by wealth. And the censor also is in charge of moral behavior. So Augustus could either kick people out of the Senate by saying they either don't have enough money or they're not moral enough, or he could allow people into the Senate by holding the power of the censor. So without any political offices and with no real title, Augustus becomes the absolute ruler of Rome. So look at how he talks about that in his Deeds of the Divine Augustus, and think about maybe what language he doesn't use when he talks about his life and his achievements. The inscription that we're reading, the Deeds of Divine Augustus, is actually set up all over the Roman Empire. So this is how Augustus chose to publicize his activities. And it was set up posthumously, that is, after Augustus died. After Augustus's reign, we have the reign of the Julio-Claudians. And when the Julio-Claudian dynasty comes to an end, we have our first dynastic change with Vespasian. So Vespasian is the first ruler of a new dynasty. Does that influence how he talks about his power? So read the laws of Vespasian, right? Laws of the divine Vespasian, and see how he says, what powers he says he has, and how he says he has them, right? Why does he have them? And then, much later, around 155, we've got Aelius Aristides talking about the reign of Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius is said to have been one of the 5 good emperors in the 2nd century. Has the way that an emperor articulates power changed in the 2nd century? So when we meet in class, we'll talk about these 3 different ways that Roman emperors articulated power. Talk about change over time, if we see change over time, and also think about similarities to other articulations of power we've already looked at. And remember, for the midterm, if I give you a blank outline map with none of these names on it, could you identify this as the Roman Empire? I look forward to talking with you in class. Till next